crucially, I think it depends on how long these tariffs last for. What we've seen so far from the Trump administration is that tariffs have been used as a negotiating tactic, as a bargaining chip. We saw this with Colombia, when Colombia was refusing to take flights of deported people back from the US. President Trump threatened very steep tariffs on Colombian imports, including crude oil, big export to Colombia from Colombia to the US. And after that, an agreement was very quickly reached. Tariff threat went away. It is quite possible that's exactly what we're going to see here with the tariffs on Mexico and Canada. And certainly I think that's the expectation still in the market, is that this is going to be pretty short-lived. And that's why you're not seeing huge market reactions right now. If this is something that goes away in a few days, then it's something that everyone can live with. It's not that big of a deal. The question is, what happens if the tariffs last longer, if days become weeks and weeks become months? Then it does get much more serious. It gets more serious in lots of ways. It puts upward pressure on prices and then costs throughout the US economy. We're hearing about retaliatory measures being taken by Canada and by Mexico, possibly by other countries as well. And what in general that will tend to do is put a brake on economic growth. It will hit growth really around the world, and that means slower demand growth. That's bad news for stocks, for equity markets. It's bad news for commodity markets as well, and that would tend to put downward pressure on oil prices. Now, we're not there yet. Haven't seen any of this really starting to kick in, but that's definitely where we could be if this tariff situation goes on for weeks and months. So Donald Trump is planning a lot of regulatory changes that are going to be very positive in general for the oil and gas industry in the US. And a lot of the things he's announced already have been welcomed by the industry. Most of them don't really kick in immediately. It takes time for deregulation to have an effect. It's also important to remember that what happens in oil and gas production in the US is not in the control of whoever happens to be in the White House. It's set by the private sector. It's set by thousands of individual companies who in many cases are responding to what their investors want. And what investors in the US oil and gas sector want generally is return on capital. They want dividends, they want share buybacks. They don't want to see the companies going for growth at all costs. And so that's going to mean, I think, that we're not going to see sort of an immediate boom. President Trump's talked about drill, baby, drill. Maybe over time we see some changes. That's not going to be an immediate thing that happens overnight. And so that big increase in supply, that is not going to happen. Any kind of increase in supply, it's going to take time. It'll come over months and years. And so that's not going to have an immediate impact one way or the other, particularly on prices, we don't think. One thing that is quite interesting, though, is what's happening to natural gas in terms of natural gas demand. And again, this is not necessarily an immediate thing, but certainly something which we think is happening over time, is you're seeing natural gas demand in the US starting to build. We're seeing exports increasing. There's already a wave of new LNG export facilities under construction in the US. We're going to see more because of the Trump administration approving permits for export sales for a new wave of projects. So that's going to drive up US LNG exports. At the same time, domestic demand is growing, in particular because of AI and data centers. Of course, tremendous excitement over possibilities for AI. All these tech companies wanting to build more data centers. Their expectations of what they're going to need in terms of data center capacity have just been going up and up and up and up. And a lot of those data centers are going to need to be powered by natural gas power plants. And certainly this is something the Trump administration is very keen to see. They're very much focused on not wind, not solar, not batteries, maybe nuclear, but nuclear takes a long time. If you want to get power quickly and you want to get 24/7 power quickly, the way to do that, the Trump administration thinks, is through new natural gas power plants. So you have domestic demand increasing and export demand increasing for natural gas. That's a very positive situation for US natural gas prices. Again, not necessarily immediately, but in the long term, certainly. Not going to have any effect on the market in the short term. This is all sort of long-term, theoretical, conjectural stuff. It is certainly the case that Europe, many countries in Europe are very concerned about the impact of high natural gas prices on their economies. They're worried about deindustrialization, about manufacturing, chemicals in particular, being driven out of Europe, and they want to do something about that. And one thing that could be done about it is to resume imports of low-cost Russian gas by pipeline. That is not going to happen while the war in Ukraine continues. You need to get some kind of peace deal to resolve that war before those European imports can start to pick up again. And even then it may not happen. So that's the thing to watch. President Trump has said he is keen to see an end to the war. He doesn't see any purpose in it continuing. He would like to help negotiate a peace. So certainly that is something which is kind of opening the door to a deal maybe being done, and therefore those Russian exports to Europe resuming again. But this is all some way down the line. None of this is going to be immediate.